Welcome to Mahaba. Thank you for coming on a very, very cold morning. My name is Sherrie McMillan, and my Dharma name is Xianxing. And my talk today is going to be about doubt and practicing with doubt. First, I'm going to talk about doubt in Buddhism in general, and then I will talk specifically about some Chan practices with doubt, because we were asked to talk about Chan teachings for the next few months. So doubt is kind of a big deal, isn't it? We all doubt things. And Buddhism sometimes is described as a spiritual practice for people who don't believe anything or who don't want to believe anything. As if Buddhists don't believe in anything at all and we doubt everything. One of the teachings of the Buddha that's sometimes used to support that is the Kalama Sutta. And in this sutta, the Buddha was traveling. He spent most of the year traveling. And as he was traveling by a village of people known as the Kalamas heard he was traveling by. And the Kalamas had lots of teachers like the Buddha who would come by. And they would ask these teachers to come and talk to them and share their wisdom with them. And the Kalamas had developed a problem with this because every teacher said something different. So they didn't know who to believe. It's kind of like when we look at the paper or the TV or online, and every day we see a different story about health, for instance. One day we're supposed to eat meat, the next day we're not supposed to eat meat. One day we're supposed to eat fat, the next day we're not supposed to eat fat. So some people get to the point where they don't want to believe anything at all. They just stop listening to what anybody says about their health. And when the Buddha came to the Kalamas, they said, "Venerable teacher, every time a teacher comes to us, they say something different. What are we supposed to believe? Because everyone says something different." And the Buddha said, "Well, don't believe what anybody says. Test it out for yourself. Put this teaching into practice and see if it works. If the results are good, then it's a good teaching. If the results are not good, then maybe it's not a good teaching." The Buddha was giving this talk specifically to people who were not his students, and they'd asked a specific question about how do we know whether to believe what a teacher says. So you'll note he didn't define what doubt was. He didn't describe doubt. He just said, what do you do when you don't know who to believe? And he said to test it. So we commonly do that. In America, we don't have any problem with doubting what people say. We do that all the time. It's one of our hallmarks, especially in Missouri, right, where the show me state. We don't want to believe what anybody tells us. You have to show me, you have to prove it. Our symbol is even, our state animal is the mule, because the mule doesn't just believe what you say, right? If you're riding a horse and you come to a bridge that is shaky, and you tell the horse to go out on the bridge, the horse might get a little upset, but he may very well walk across the bridge even though he thinks it's not safe because he trusts you. A mule will come to the bridge and say, "There's no way I'm going over that, I don't care what you say." The mule believes what the mule believes, and he's not going to listen to you. So we have no trouble with this doubting what someone else says. What we do sometimes have trouble with is doubting what we say ourselves. It's very easy to doubt the other person. It's not so easy to doubt ourselves. And this is one of the foundations of Buddhist practices, isn't it? It's being aware of what's going on and examining it thoroughly, not just taking it at face value. So in Buddhism we have two kinds of doubt that are described. One is the skeptical kind of doubt that just doesn't believe anything at all. The other one is the good kind of doubt, in which we examine things and see if they're actually true, and if they give a good result. So we're really supposed to practice doubt, but we're supposed to practice it in a good way. Our beliefs have to be tested. Not just the beliefs of other people, but the beliefs we have ourselves. Well, we do this. We run into these things in our lives all the time. Like when we're very young, we learn that if we drop something, it's going to fall to the ground. Have you ever seen a baby's eyes the first time he sees something go up? First time he sees a ball bounce, his eyes get very big. Because even babies and toddlers know that when you drop something, it goes down. So when they see something go up, they're shocked. And they then proceed to test everything they can reach to see if anything else will go up too. And it can drive us crazy, can't it? But they're testing things to see what the result is. Babies get a lot of delight in that. But sometimes for the rest of us, it can be really disturbing when something we believe is tested and it turns out to not be correct. My daughter had a crisis like this earlier this year, and she's given me permission to share it with everyone. Although she lets everybody know she's perfectly okay with it now. It was just disturbing at the time, but she's okay with it now. But I was sitting, and I was actually listening to a Dharma talk online, and my daughter came in and said, "Mom, why does the sea look blue?" And she comes in with questions like this all the time, and I said, "Well, just a minute," and I let the Dharma talk finished, and then I said, "Do you remember when we talked about this a few years ago?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, then let's look it up." So we found a website about seeing colors and how we see colors. And it talks about how what we're really seeing are wavelengths of light, and that light comes in various wavelengths which have the appearance of different colors. These wavelengths will bounce off of something and bounce to our eyes, and then our eyes send a signal to our brain saying that a certain wavelength of light has hit it, and our brain interprets that as a certain color. So that the objects may not be that color actually, they may not have any color at all, it's just that the light reflected from them is a certain wavelength, and our eyes and our mind interpret that as a certain color. And I was going on about how neat this was, and isn't this interesting, and how, bees and other insects and birds even see different colors than we do because they can detect wavelengths we can't. Renee said, whoa, wait a minute. And I said, okay, what? And she said, does this mean that my purple sweater is not really purple? And I said, yeah, very likely it's not purple. It's just there are wavelengths of light coming off of it. They're in what we might call the purple end of the light spectrum, and your brain interprets that as the color purple. And then I went on and started talking about how cool this was again. And she said, no. You mean it's not really purple? And I said, no, it's probably not really purple. And I went on and talked about how cool this was again. And she said, Mom, stop talking. So I stopped talking for a minute, and she seemed kind of disturbed. So after a minute I said, is there a problem with that? And she said, what I like about my sweater is that it is purple. If it's not purple, why should I like it? It's not purple. And I said, well, you still see it as purple. And she said, no, but it's not purple. And I said, okay, what you liked about it was that it had purpleness. It is purpleness. She said, yes, it is purple. It's the perfect purple. That was what I loved about it. And I said, well, it's still the same sweater. And she said, no, it's not. And she threw it across the room. And I tried to talk about it some more, and she said, no, stop talking. I don't want to hear any more about this. I hate everything. And this went on, and periodically I'd ask her, do you want to talk about colors again? And she'd say, no. And then eventually I said, do you want to talk about colors again? It was last summer, I think. And she said, oh yeah, I don't care about that anymore, it's okay. But she found it really disturbing that what she had thought about something wasn't true, because it was defined by that color, and it also defined her in a way, because this was her favorite thing, because it was purple and she loved purple, and so when she had her purple sweater on, she was enveloped in purple, and when she found out it wasn't, it was just earth-shattering. So when we find out that something we believed in isn't true, it can be very disturbing. But we can move past that disturbance if we stick with it and come to a state where we're comfortable again. In Buddhism, we are supposed to test these things, and we're supposed to test teachings that we hear. We're even supposed to look when we go to a teacher. Are we going to like this teacher? Is this a good teacher? Is what this teacher says true? And Buddhism has some definitions for different kinds of faith. And one of them is what is called vivid faith or admiring faith. Sometimes it's called devotional faith. And this is a faith in the teachers, the Sangha of the Venerables. Sometimes when you read about this, this is described as something that's really cultural, and you don't really have that in America. And I used to think, well, that's probably true. We don't have that culture of believing in teachers, so we don't have that here. But over time, I've come to understand that this isn't something cultural. This is actually something we develop by being around teachers that we respect, that we can see that they put the Dharma into practice, and we can see that they've been putting it into practice for a long time, and we can see the way they are. And that inspires us to have admiration and respect for them, like we have for our venerables here, whom we see working so hard, and they do things so well. We come to admire them and respect them, and they encourage us to continue with our practices, because we see that someone else can become such a good person and not have anger when something bad happens, and can stay so calm and loving. Talk about my daughter again. I didn't tell her I was going to talk about this part. When she was very little, she used to call the venerables the Buddhas. And one day we were sitting, and I had the TV on and the sound turned off because we were waiting for something she wanted to watch to come on, and we were reading a book. And she looked up and she yelled, "They're hitting the Buddhas! Why are they hitting the Buddhas?" And she started crying. And I looked up, and it was a news piece that had broken in, and it showed that the venerables in Burma were protesting, I remember, a few years ago. And they were in the street protesting, and they were being beaten by soldiers. And she found this profoundly disturbing. And she said, "How can they do that? Don't they know what good people those are?" So this wasn't something she had to be told. She learned this by coming here and seeing them. So I don't think that devotional faith or vivid faith is necessarily something culturally born. It's something that we develop from seeing people who represent the Dharma. So it's something that we develop maybe with doubt, and we see it put into practice, and we develop a faith. Another kind of faith is eager faith or wishing faith. When we think about good things that come when one practices the Dharma, and we think about bad things that come when one doesn't practice the Dharma. And we sometimes talk about this in our study groups. For instance, we were talking about drinking a few weeks ago, and we talked about how, well, you don't think that one drink is a problem, but then you see how one drink leads to another drink, and on and on and on. It leads to all kinds of problems. So that thinking about the benefits if I follow the precepts and the Dharma teachings leads to what's called eager faith. You want the good things that happen if you follow the precepts and the practices, so you start following them. It's like if I find out that if I meditate on a regular basis, I'm a calmer person, and I don't get upset so much. That makes me want to keep meditating, because I've seen that it does good things for me. Another kind of faith is confident faith. This is a faith when you have put the teachings into practice over and over again, and you know that they work, and so you just do them. You don't have to think about it anymore. There's an additional kind of faith called faith that is not given up even at the point of death. I think in Chinese they say even if the knife is at your throat, which is very vivid. But this means even if you're threatened with death, you don't give up your practice. And this doesn't just mean you have to have a knife actually put to your throat, of course. You could just be facing our normal death when we get old and we get sick. Do we keep practicing, or do we become afraid and retreat from our practice and stop practicing? So if you have practice throughout your life, then you don't stop because you know it works. So how do we get to that kind of faith? What are the practices? One of the great things about Buddhism is that there's so many practices. There's a practice for everybody. Every school or lineage has special practices for which it is known. They take some aspect that's in the Buddha's teaching and develop it and put it into a special, well-developed practice that is used frequently in that school, and that school often becomes known for that specific practice. So there are different schools of Buddhism and different lineages of Buddhism. And each lineage of school is usually known for some specific teaching or practice. For instance, the Tibetan schools are often known for their guru devotions, in which they do come from the Buddhist teaching. They're based on the practice of working with a teacher or a noble friend. And they've developed that with special teachings on that. And special practices for that. Some of the things that Chan is known for specifically are what we usually call koans in English. In Chinese, there are actually two words for this, and I probably won't pronounce them correctly, but one is gonggan, and one is huaito. A gonggan is a public record or a story, and a huaito is a question that a teacher gives to a student. In Japanese, gonggan is called koan, and the word koan is often used for both things, both for the stories and for the questions. So when we talk about it in English, when people talk about koans, they often mean specifically the question. So a public record, or a gonggan, is a story about an interaction between a teacher and some students. And they're often things that sound very crazy, because people are shouting, and sometimes people are hitting each other. There's one with a dead cat. I don't remember all the details about that one, but they sound quite crazy when you read them sometimes. And the point of reading them is to try to think about what they really mean, what's going on here, to not just think, gosh, that's a crazy story, those Buddhists are crazy back then. But to think about what was really going on and what was the point of the whole thing. It's not necessarily to repeat it for yourself. Venerable Xianxing, in his book Subtle Wisdom, talks about gongans and huatos, and he describes an event in which someone tried to reproduce a public case by coming at him with an incense stick and hitting him with it. He wanted to, enact it by hitting the teacher with a stick. And Venerable Xianxing says you're not supposed to do that, actually. The point is not to reenact it. You're just supposed to examine it and maybe see what it means. A huato is a question that you investigate. So it means word and head is what huato means. So when we practice using this, we're examining things, and we're examining things in detail, we're investigating. So the question may be something like, what was your face before you were born? Who are you? What is this body? And so on. We've heard a lot of these questions before because some of them have become part of popular culture. But traditionally, these would not be used until you had developed a state of single-mindedness, generally, which means your mind had become concentrated and very focused. So, someone who'd entered the lowest jhana might be given a question, for instance. It's given at that point because you are able to focus on something with a lot of concentration. The first level is to simply keep repeating the question. And this can actually help develop your concentration further, as in when we are following our breath when we sit or when we recite the Buddha's name. You can just keep repeating the question over and over and over. This develops concentration. Develops concentration on the question. Second level is asking or querying. You begin really asking the question rather than just repeating it. If the question is, for instance, who am I? You start wondering, who am I? All the time. Until it gets very disturbing, because you're really wondering, who am I? After all. This is turning that doubt that we have about everything out there onto what we think we know for sure. We don't know doubt. When the question begins to have real meaning for you, you really want to figure it out, you really start to investigate it. When you're really deeply engaged with the question, the sensation of great doubt arises. You really want to know the answer and you won't let go. But ultimately, this question is supposed to take you from the state of one mind or single mind to no mind, which means you overcome your connection to a self and the separation that you feel between yourself and the other. So you stop having a mind that believes that the self is real, the self is separate. All those things that we talk about. It's being really difficult to figure out in Buddhism. So it's a way of breaking through that. It's one of the practices for breaking through that. So it's overcoming our strong attachment and identification to self. when we come to the Dharma, we actually have a faith, right? We may think we're very skeptical, but we usually have a faith in ourself being real. So practices like Wato and having these doubts and practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness, being mindful of our body, our feelings, our perceptions, and our mind. These bring our mind around from just doubting everything else and what everybody else says to examining what we believe about ourselves that we never doubt, right? We never doubt this is my body, this is who I am. We never doubt that the person who cuts me off in traffic must be a bad person because they cut me off in traffic. Practicing the Dharma helps us overcome those beliefs and realize that that person who cuts us off in traffic isn't necessarily Lex Luthor, right? He's just a person who was driving his car and maybe he lost his concentration for a while. Maybe he just heard that somebody died. Maybe he's late for work. Maybe he just didn't see us. Who knows? He's got his problems. He's not out to get us. Everything is not about me, and I'm not, the center of the universe. So when we develop that state of no mind, we're able to know these things because we're not so focused on ourselves. We've given up that idea that everything is me versus the world. It's not me versus the world. We're all connected. We're all the same. I'm not better than everybody else. I'm not worse than everybody else. We develop an equanimity in looking at everyone else. When we realize that we don't know who we are, maybe we don't know who everybody else is either. And we can look at everyone in a fresh way with some compassion and kindness instead of with these walls we build up about ourselves. Trying to protect ourselves, trying to wrap ourselves in our special purpleness that supports us and makes us feel special because we know purple and we love purple and purple is me. We can let go of the purple. We're like a baby, we can watch a ball bounce and be delighted maybe that something happened that we weren't expecting instead of being upset that the ball didn't drop to the ground because balls are supposed to drop to the ground, right? Everything drops to the ground. Things don't always happen the way we want them to or expect them to. And when we have this solid belief in me being real, it's very upset to have changes in this solid me. Worrying about this me getting old, that's not right because I don't look like that. That's not who I am. Or we worry about me being sick and we think, that's not me, that's not who I am. I'm not that sick person, I'm a healthy person. Or when we become a person who we realize is dying, we think, well, that's not me, I'm not a person who's dying, I'm a person who's alive. If we can overcome that, if we can doubt that, then we can face all these changes without having the fear and the anger, because we've developed enough wisdom to not be attached to what we thought was real. Through using doubt skillfully, not as the great skeptic, but just as a skillful doubter, we can learn how to understand what's really happening, understand who people really are, and not be caught up in what we think about people. things that I think about when I think about how people think about people is that I saw a TV show on PBS a while ago, and it's about the brain. And there was a study mentioned on this in which he said that people were shown pictures on a computer of a hand being stabbed. And there were identifiers on the screen, like Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim. And in this study, I found this really difficult to believe, but in this study, people were wearing sensors on their body to check their heart rate and so on. And in this study, if people saw a hand being stabbed and it belonged to the group with which they themselves identified, they would get upset. But supposedly, they would not get upset if they saw the hand being stabbed and the identifier on the screen was some other religious group or ethnic group. I find it really difficult to believe that nobody had any feelings, but this kind of inability to feel for someone else when you see them getting stabbed is based on thinking that they're different from you, right? If we identify so much with what we're wrapping ourselves in to believe in ourselves, like American or Christian or Buddhist or whatever, so that we have people who are others and then the people who are like us, and then we feel upset when the people like us get upset, but not the others. That's what leads to all kinds of violence in the world. So I think that this doubt is really important in the Buddhist practices. We need to use it skillfully. And use it in order to find peace, rather than to just shut people out by automatically doubting other people. We need to turn down on ourselves sometimes and doubt what we think and what we believe. So thank you for listening.